Hello and welcome to week 5. For week 5, you're going to be writing an annotated bibliography. When you look at the New College Writing Center's information about writing an annotated bibliography written by Deborah Knott, you found out a little bit about what an annotated bibliography really is. And it ultimately just gives an account of the research that has been done on a given topic, but in this case, it's the research that you've done on your topic. And so what happens is you list your sources and then you annotate them. You give a little bit of information about them. So it might have a summary of each source. It might have an assessment about its value or its relevance. But when you look at this particular reading for this week, you'll notice you've already selected the sources. So you've gone through and you've thought about sources that will relate to your topic, both from the Macomb Library databases as well as from just a Google or a web browser search. And you know that the Macomb Library databases sources have already been vetted and evaluated, and that's why they appear in those databases. But similarly, this week you performed an evaluation of those 4 additional sources and decided whether they were worthwhile to support your argument. So then ultimately you're going to summarize the argument of the source, and that helps you kind of dig into what is that author or group's main point. What are they arguing for and how they used research to support that. And what you see in this particular source is an example of just the summary of a source. I do want to point out that the citation, the McIver source citation, is in APA format, not MLA format. So you don't want to follow that as an example. But you can see the summary of that particular source and how the writer has identified the argument. And you can see that they've listed the research question as well as some their methodology and main conclusions. But ultimately, some strategies that might help you as you go through and are able to summarize that argument of your author or group that have created the sources, those 6 sources that you found. You can look for things like the author's thesis. You can look for key terms or ideas. You can think about how the text is laid out and organized. You can pay attention to opening sentences or look for paragraphs that summarize the argument. But at any rate, you've looked through these 6 sources already. You have a good idea of what the main argument is, and you should be able at this point to summarize that. And of course, like I said, you've already assessed the relevance and the value of the sources. You've relied on the Macomb Library databases to be credible sources because you know that they go through a rigorous process to become part of those databases. Similarly, you've gone through an exercise for week 4 where you've assessed the relevance and the value of the sources that you've found in other places outside of the Macomb Library databases. Now, as you begin to summarize, as you begin to actually annotate these sources, I thought this was helpful to have some language, some verbs that will help you move into those summaries and discussions of those sources. So this is just a great resource to get you into that summarization and annotation of each of your sources. The University of Michigan also provided us with information about annotated bibliographies, and we talked about the bibliography part of it. That's your citations in MLA format as well as the annotations, those summaries, and there's a little bit more you're going to do than just summarize, but this just gives you a little bit more information on how to go about writing an annotated bibliography. And again, it encourages you to summarize those key points of the source. What was the topic? How was the research done? You can critique the methods. These are ways that students annotate their sources, which and again, because that's set up in bibliographic form or in MLA format as a works cited form, you are simply moving through the process of annotating that bibliography, that set of sources that you're using. All right, and we've talked about this a couple times. You've already critiqued the sources themselves. You will probably add in the importance of that source, and of course, as a researcher, you're reflecting on the usefulness of the source. In this particular U of M site, these web pages give you some examples too, where you can see other annotated bibliographies, just so that you've got that visual. Now, what you're going to actually do for this assignment this week, and of course, this is, getting into it, I hope that you're starting to see that every single assignment builds towards this final research paper. All of these pieces help you write and fine-tune more so that you can use these ultimately as you put together your research paper. But ultimately, what you're going to do is you are going to put the annotations for each source directly under each citation, and you're going to make sure that you've got correct MLA formatting. So that's going to be important. And again, this is a piece that saves you time at the end, because when you get to that final paper, you can simply copy these citations into your works cited page, and you'll know that they are correct. All right. So how you're going to structure this: the first page, you're going to have 2 to 3 paragraphs of a proposal. And again, you've written some of this already. You'll be able to expand on it, but ultimately you're going to write a description of the topic, the problem you've been writing about and researching this semester. You can add more detail now because of the research you're done, and you're going to give plenty of context because you're writing as if your audience is learning about this topic for the first time. You're going to also include an explanation of the causes, effects, and consequences of this problem and who is affected by this. And some questions you can use are: where or when did this issue begin? Why is it happening? Who is affected by it? Who should take action? And then the proposal for what you intend to argue will be included. So you can use phrases like, I will argue that, or I intend to explain how. And then the last part of this is that you're going to present a working thesis statement. So remember, when you move into that thesis statement, this is your argument in action. You know what I mean? So you'll argue that, perhaps a particular solution to a problem is X. But when you write your working thesis statement, you're not going to say, I will argue that. You simply state that intention. So, for example, by following these solutions, this problem will be solved. That's obviously very rudimentary and very basic, but I think you get the idea that you're going to move from your intention to an argumentative thesis statement. Remember, thesis statements need to be clear, arguable, and qualified if necessary. So if there's any parameters you need to set, you need to state that in that thesis statement. All right, then on the following page, you're going to have that total of your 6 sources that we've worked on over the last couple of weeks: 2 from the Macomb Library database, your 1 primary source, those additional sources up to 3 from the iSearch essay, and any new sources that you deem credible as you did that whole evaluation of your sources in week 4. So you want to think about, you need a total of 6. 2 have to be from the Macomb Library databases. 1 needs to be primary. You've got 3 others at your disposal. Which ones work best for your research paper? As noted, choose ones that you're confident about and that you'll most likely use in your final paper. And if you don't think a source is credible, you really should take this opportunity to find new ones. Your annotation paragraphs for all 6 sources are a minimum of 200 words for each annotation. They should be in paragraph form, 2 to 3, and they should be written directly underneath each citation. So remember, the first page of this is that proposal that was on the previous slide. Everything after that is going to be the source in MLA format, followed by 2 to 3 paragraphs that should be written, that should include a brief summary of the source's main argument, an evaluation of the source's quality, and why you deem it to be credible. You've got all of that information that you used, like audience, purpose, authenticity, credibility, all of the things that you evaluated can be used at your disposal to explain why the particular source is credible. An explanation of how you intend to use the source to support your argument that you propose. So that would be the final part of the annotation. So again, source, 2 to 3 paragraphs, so you can see you've got 3 points you're covering. You could probably write a short paragraph on each of these, minimum of 200 words, and then you move to the next source and you do the same thing. And then, keep moving through your 6 sources. Your sources should be in alphabetical order like you would have for a works cited page. And as noted, you're going to use meticulous MLA formatting. You'll want to follow those guidelines. And the final submission guidelines are that obviously you're going to meet the criteria. You're going to submit in a Word or PDF format. It will be in MLA format, so you'll have your heading in the upper left-hand corner. You should have a header in the top right corner, which is your last name and page number, a title, which in this case, you can be somewhat creative in the sense that, an annotated bibliography of sources supporting and add your topic or something to that effect. Double spaced, Times New Roman 12-point font, 1-inch margins, left justified text with obviously indentation. But in this case, because you're starting on that second part with your annotated bibliography portions, you want to remember that if you do go to a second line for a works cited format, for MLA format, you will need to do what we call a hanging indent. So the first line is not indented, all subsequent lines are indented by one tab. And then definitely view the rubric for this assignment. And remember that any assignments that have been plagiarized or generated using AI will receive a 0 grade. Of course, as always, I encourage you to get started as soon as possible, but to let me know if you have any questions.